Hello, I'm Jason, and I'm getting ready to go on another trip to Alaska. And since that's one of the more popular articles on my site, I figured while I'm putting the gear in my bag and getting myself organized for that, I could throw together a video and talk about what I'm taking. Now, I'm working on a more comprehensive sort of what to pick, how to think through what you're picking or what you need to pick type video. And this isn't that, although I'm going to touch on a few of the things that why I've chosen the gear I've chosen. I'm not going to be focusing on the like details, so to speak. I'm not going to be like what thought process or what motivation goes into things. So here's the bag I'm taking. This is a Think Tank Airport Commuter. It's more than big enough for the kind of gear that I have to take to Alaska now, and it's quite a bit lighter this trip than it has been, or well, certainly than it was on the first trip, and probably even on the last couple of trips, or the last time I've been there. So, jumping in. Starting with cameras. So, camera. I'm taking two. This is my backup body, but I have two identical Canon 5D Mark IVs. They're just what I have. That's what I'm taking. Now Alaska is not the kind of place that's like where you have to have a DSLR, or where you're way better off having a DSLR, or you're way better off having a mirrorless camera. It's really anything that works for you, that you have. It doesn't have to be full frame. Crop sensor is perfectly viable. In fact, maybe even better in some respects. It doesn't have to be a DSLR. Mirrorless and even bridge cameras are more than adequate to be up to the task. I use the 5D Mark IV because that's what I have. And like I said, I have two of them. One's the primary. My primary camera is actually what I'm using to record this video. But I take a backup camera largely because I can, and because if something happens to my camera while I'm shooting, like it fails or shutter dies or something, I'd rather be able to keep shooting than have to spend the rest of the trip kind of miserable that I have a camera problem. In addition to the 5D Mark IV, I am also taking a EOS M3 with a 22mm f2 EFM lens. And this camera is an experiment for me. I don't usually carry a compact camera with me. I'm doing that this is the first time actually that I'm carrying a compact camera with me. And my motivation for this has been largely, in the past, there have been times, especially like going to dinner, where I don't want to carry my full DSLR and a f2.8 zoom and all the kind of gear that I would normally have with me. I want something lighter and more compact. And in the past, what I've used is my iPhone. And I have never, in all the times that I have, especially like in a dark restaurant or low light in a restaurant at dinner, I have never been able to get images out of my iPhone that I was really happy with. And even though I'm not using it for like to make fine art prints or something like that, I still want to be happy with the image that I'm producing when I go back to view it. And noisy, kind of hard to poorly defined, awful images are not, well, I shouldn't say awful images, but the noisy images that I get out of my iPhone and have gotten out of previous phones just don't do it for me. So I'm trying the EOS M. It's markedly better than an iPhone. Now, it's not the best APS-C mirrorless camera on the market, but I didn't buy it for this task. It was actually, I got it basically because my mom upgraded her camera, and this was her old camera, and so I'm giving it a shot to see if it works out experimentally. And then the third camera that I take is a GoPro Hero 5 Black, or the third type of camera. And I started taking GoPros after, well, I bought this specifically after I went on a road trip in the American Southwest, and I did a lot of the driving on that trip. And in driving all the time, we were driving through spectacular scenery, but I was driving, so I was paying attention to the road and not the landscapes. And I realized I really wanted something that would enable me to go back and look at where I've been, what I did, relive the trip, so to speak. Especially, like I said, when I'm driving and I can't spend the time to create that mental memory of a landscape. And so I got this to mount essentially in the front window of the car, and it's got a suction mount, and I use it to record a time lapse of where I'm going, where the car's going, etc. And then I can edit that together at the end of the trip into, a continuous video to let me go back and rewatch the trip. I then subsequently used that on cruises. In past cruises, I have been fortunate enough to have a bow-facing cabin on the Norwegian Jewel, and having a bow-facing cabin, I could mount this in the window, again, suction cup, power it with an AC adapter and a big long power cord, USB cable, and have it pointed out the front of the ship. And, as the ship was sailing through all of Alaska, it was recording, what was ahead of us. This trip, I don't have a bow-facing cabin, but I'm expecting to try and find some use for it. And, of course, it's an action camera. It's small, it's light. I have a head mount for it, so I can take it on an excursion as just as an action camera to record video. So that's the cameras that I'm doing. A DSLR, an experiment for me in having a pocket-sized or handheld compact camera with, now it's mirrorless interchangeable, but I have just one small lens on it, and the action camera. So the next thing is lenses. And the first trip I went to Alaska, I took a ton of glass with me. I had all kinds of stuff. I had no idea what to expect or what I would need, and I just totally overpacked. Now I'm down to essentially 2 lenses and a teleconverter. And so I have a general purpose zoom. This is a Canon 24-70 f2.8 Mark II. It doesn't need to be an f2.8 lens. It can be an f4 lens, but you do want something, in my experience, that covers the general purpose focal range, a little bit of wide, a little bit on the telephoto end. In some respects, a 24-105 or 24-120 would be even better, or the crop camera equivalents of those, just because you would get more range out of one lens. And the 100 millimeter range on a full frame camera I found incredibly useful for shooting landscapes, which I'll come back to in a minute. And the other lens I carry is a telephoto zoom. This is a Canon 100-400 Mark II, 2nd gen. And you could go longer than this. You could definitely step up to like a 150-500. I don't think a Nikon 200-500 would be an especially good choice, because I end up shooting a lot of landscapes with this lens too at 100 millimeters. And not having the wide end, I've run into 2 situations sort of where not having a wide end on a telephoto zoom in Alaska is problematic. One is, as I said, landscapes. I shoot a lot of landscapes with non-standard landscape lenses. So I don't shoot at 24 millimeters. I shoot at 70 or at 100, and I shoot a stitched pano, and I use that for the landscape. And the reason for that is, if you're shooting from the ship, a lot of times, and even on shore I found a lot of times, the landscapes tend to be very wide and not very tall. To the point where, like, if you want the entire fjord in your landscape, then you have to you either would be shooting at super wide angles to get that to happen, or you would have to do a stitched pano. Now, the problem with shooting at a single shot in a wide angle is you throw away a ton of resolution and image information. So on the first trip that I went, I was started shooting landscapes with a wide angle lens, and to get the composition I wanted of the mountains and the fjord and the glacier, I would end up where at least a third of the picture was water with nothing of any photographic interest in it at all, just water, and a third of the picture was either just uniform cloud cover or uniform sky color and not even interesting clouds. And when you threw all of the stuff away to get the crop of a landscape that was good, that the kind of landscape that you wanted to have a composition of, I was shooting with a 5D Mark III at the time, so a 22 megapixel camera, and I would end up with maybe 4 to 6 megapixels of resulting image data. And to me, that's almost completely useless. I like to print big, and printing big with 4 megapixels of image data doesn't really work so good. So I have taken to, for landscapes, either punching in and shooting a pano, or shooting a one shot but punching into a specific, like a single mountain or a single part of the glacier, or sitting around 70 to 100 millimeters and shooting a stitched pano. Now, the other place where I found having not enough wide in your telephoto becomes a real problem is actually in some of the wildlife situations you can run into. For example, say whale watching. One of the trips that I was on, in fact, it was my first trip, a humpback whale, we were getting ready to go out, and we had just got on, or were just getting on the boat, a small boat whale watching thing in Icy Strait Point, and a humpback came up maybe 50, 60 feet, 100 feet from the boat in a feeding lunge. And it was incredibly spectacular, and I kind of tried to shoot it, but at the time I had already put my teleconverter on the lens, and that 40 millimeter extra at reach at 100 millimeters, the 40 millimeter extra focal length at 100 millimeters, or the widest end on my camera, made it to where I had a very hard time getting the whale in the frame. It was that close. And so if you, like with a teleconverter, obviously you're making a choice of whether you're going to have that extra reach tacked on. But with like a 150 to 600 or a 200 to 500, you're starting with that, and there's no way to take it away. And so what I found is with respect to wildlife, it was much more useful for me to have the 100 millimeters and be able to put a teleconverter on and reach out when I needed to than would be to have a longer lens, like a 200 to 400 or a 200 to 500 or that kind of thing, or a 150 to 600, and not have the ability to pull all the way back. Now, of course, you can compensate for that with a second camera with a 70 to 200 on it, but then you start getting into more weight, more gear, more, carrying things, making decisions, how you're carrying things, having to switch cameras, having to grab the right camera. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but in my opinion, at least, that's something I would be more willing to do if I was, say, going on like a National Geographic expedition cruise than a regular cruise ship cruise with my family. And so in that little bit there, I touched on the third thing, which I said is I carry a teleconverter. And this is a Canon 1.4X Mark III. It's third gen Canon teleconverter. And basically it's a just-in-case item for me. In kind of the same way, I don't carry a lot of just-in-case gear, but kind of in the same way as I carry a just-in-case body, although there are actually, I think, uses for having the second body, especially to shoot video and so forth. The teleconverter is small, it's easy to have with me, and it's easy to have sort of as a just in case, and that 40% extra reach really lets me sort of reach out if in situations where I need it. And additionally, in my experience in testing this, I have found that I get better image quality using the teleconverter with the 100 to 400 Mark II than I would if I cropped 40% tighter in the picture, then either resampled it up or just, left it there as being cropped in tighter. So that's pretty much all the gear I take. I will have a couple of polarizers that I haven't packed yet, or camera gear. I will have a couple of polarizers which I haven't packed yet, but that's kind of it. I don't take an awful lot of camera gear anymore. It just isn't, in my experience, really necessary. Now, kind of the stuff to go with the camera gear. I take 4 sets of 2 batteries for my cameras, which is probably massively overkill, but in fact, that probably could get me through an entire 7-day Alaska cruise without having to even plug batteries into a charger. But I keep them in these Think Tank 2-battery pouches, and they're just 2 lithium-ion Canon LPE6 batteries per pouch, and I keep them together as a set. And I don't know if you can see it on the video, but on these 2, there's silver colored in arrows on the batteries, and I've colored in the like insertion direction arrows on the Canon batteries because I have 4 of the original LPE6 and I have 4 of the newer LPE6N batteries, and the gold, I've color coded mine so I can find them easier, so I know what I'm using. So silver is the original LPE6, and then I colored gold on the LPE6Ns. To go with the batteries, of course, I take a couple of chargers. I like to have a charger, since I work in pairs because of the battery grips, I take 2 chargers for those batteries. Now, battery situation on the EOS M, I'm only taking a single battery and a charger for that. Now, in the past, I have run into not the greatest battery life with Canon's EOS M mirrorless cameras, except I'm not planning on using it a tremendous amount, and I don't expect to not have at least a day's worth of battery in the camera, on a daily basis, as just to have as a grab it out of my pocket and shoot something kind of camera. And then the GoPro, I have 2 batteries for the GoPro, but most of the time that it'll be powered, it'll probably be plugged into either a USB power bank or an AC adapter. Additionally, I take with me to Alaska a tripod, and my tripod's off camera over here. It's actually holding up my mic boom at the moment, and it's a carbon fiber Benro Travel Angel. I think it's a FTC or FTC 28 something or other. I don't believe they make them anymore, but they have replaced them with what in some respects may actually be a better model because it has an integral ball head and the legs fold up around the ball head, and so it's a little bit more compact than mine is with a ball head. And then sticking on top of it is a Really Right Stuff BH55. I don't have it on there right now, and I don't usually travel with them connected, but it's a lot overkill for that tripod, and a BH40 or something smaller would be vastly better in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's the best ball head I have, and I would rather have the good quality ball head that's smooth and operates well than have a lower quality ball head. Not that a Acra Swiss Z1 is a low quality ball head, but I find that's a little bit more stubborn than the Really Right Stuff, and so I would just rather have the Really Right Stuff on there. And then the final question or answer, or not answer, the final sort of area is storage. So I carry a mix of compact flash and SD cards. I think right now I'm sitting at close to 700 gigabytes of flash cards that I take with me, which is mostly in terms of capacity SD cards and not compact flash cards, but you know, I carry both. And in my experience with the 5D Mark IV, compact flash cards work better for shooting stills, at least when you want a high frame rate or you want to maximize your high frame rate, because they get the maximum write speed out of the camera, and so your buffer clears faster and you get a little bit larger buffer when you're shooting, whereas SD cards tend to be, especially UHS 1, I use SanDisk Extreme Pros, the UHS SD cards tend to be more than adequate for shooting video. Even 500 megabit 4K video, I've had no problems putting that on the SD cards, whereas I've actually had problems with that recording to certain compact flash cards, and just they weren't fast enough or something. And backing all of that, I take my laptop, which I probably wouldn't normally need to take, but I have found that having my laptop with me allows me to download the day's shooting and start editing and playing with it when I'm, kind of winding down at the end of the day. And that way, when I get back from the trip, I'm not completely overwhelmed by like 7,000 images or 10,000 images or, however many images I shot, trying to edit and process and deal with all of those images. It's easier for me to mess with that along the way. And since I'm taking so much storage in terms of cards, and I only have 500 gig in my laptop, I'm also taking a 250 gig solid state USB 3 drive that I can throw in and back stuff up to that too, so I can have a backup of my stuff, even though I don't know how necessary. I haven't actually been in a situation yet where I've needed a backup of these kind of things, but I think it's a good idea, especially with downloading cards to, on the go, to kind of have that extra layer of backup. So I don't, even though I'm downloading cards, I don't format the cards that I have or that I've downloaded unless I absolutely need to. While I'm in the field, I will bring everything home, so I have basically 2 copies of what or what I've shot. And so that's about it. That's like I said, I don't find that I need to take a tremendous amount of gear, and I don't consider this to be a tremendous amount of gear. And aside from having a second camera and a compact camera that I could both easily cut out, that's about really all I think it takes to do photography on a cruise in Alaska. So, thanks for watching. If you found this useful or found this video useful, please smash the thumbs up button and consider subscribing. For more written content on photography, travel, and camera reviews, camera gear reviews, you can check out my website at pointsandfocus.com. And I am on Twitter, although I am not tremendously active. If you need to reach out and ask a question about something, in this video or whatever, or you just want to see when I have updated content on my website or published a new article, you can find me on Twitter at pointsandfocus. So, thanks for watching, and see you next time.